They say in Newport, the Kavanaughs don't measure happiness by laughter, it's by legacy. If there's one thing I learned from childhood, it's that every choice I make is forever etched in the family tree. Here, every decision is like a needle stuck into the thick traditional tapestry that hangs along the main hall, suffocating anyone. Late summer in Rhode Island is usually beautiful, but on our estate, where the lawn is trimmed to the inch with hand shears and my mother keeps the rose bushes trimmed to the right bloom, that beauty carries a pressure. Newport is always the season for garden parties, and today the Kavanaughs are hosting one for the local historical society. The crowd chats leisurely amid the clink of crystal glasses, white linens, and colorful wide-brimmed hats huddle under the shade of the spreading maple trees. The guests come from all over the area, mostly people who are used to measuring their self-worth by the length of their year-end check. I, Meredith Kavanaugh, the eldest daughter, was transformed into an impeccable version of myself. A fitted beige party dress, hair neatly tied back, a smile plastered on my face. My job was to help Mom, which meant doing all the nameless things, greeting guests, double-checking the bread and butter, reminding June not to stand near the cocktail table, straightening the napkin Mom thought was folded wrong. Anyone who's ever been to a party at my house knows, it's all a show. Behind every greeting, every glance, there are hidden meanings, compliments mixed with comparisons, and sometimes little cuts that only the person in the audience can feel. My mother, Lorraine, looked like the queen of the party, a pale tweed dress, a string of pearls tucked into her neck, her eyes scanning every detail. No crease, no stain escaped her scrutiny. Meredith, Mrs. Huntington's glass is a little dirty. Can you fix it? She whispered, both a reminder and a challenge. It was a nameless responsibility, but it was there at every moment. Arthur, my father, stood at the edge of the garden, a glass of scotch in hand, nodding to each guest. He would say things like, "My niece handled this event like a pro," or, "How lucky Lorraine was to have the idea." His compliments were always light and polite, like an empty envelope. My sister, June, stood on the porch as still as a statue. Her eyes were fixed on the sea, avoiding the crowds. If there was one thing I knew about June, it was that she understood the art of invisibility better than anyone I had ever met. I pitied her because in this house, silence was a form of self-defense. Subtle criticism was a staple of Newport's rich women's circle. Mom's friend Harriet had a soft voice, but every sentence was full of judgment. "Oh, Meredith, you've gone for a minimalist dress this year. Is that what young people like?" Or, "June is growing up so fast, but I wish she'd get out more." I just smiled, "Yes, thank you," and walked away, trying to maintain the grace my mother had taught me. Throughout the party, I kept moving like a wind-up machine. My smile never faded, even when I wanted to scream inside. Every time I passed the rose vine on the porch, I paused, hoping the scent of the flowers could soothe the suffocating feeling growing in my chest. One moment, I accidentally heard my mother whispering to Harriet at the tea table, "She will learn humility, one way or another." I stood there for a few seconds, stunned. In our world, humility was not a natural quality. It was a lesson, sometimes learned at great cost, often passed on through unseen stumbles. My mother's words had planted a seed of doubt in me, and I realized that I, too, was beginning to be unsure of who I really was and who the Meredith of Kavanaugh the town expected me to be. As the party wound down and the dusk bathed the bay in a deep golden hue, I collected a few stray glasses alone. Neighbors filed out in droves, leaving the lawn mottled with footprints and lingering bits of gossip in the air. I sat down on the porch steps, leaned against a pillar, and let out a sigh I didn't even realize I had. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the screen lit up with a text message, "Meredith, call me urgently. There's a problem with the store." My business partner, Clara, Wasn't the type to panic, but the short message sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, everything I'd tried to maintain as a Kavanaugh facade felt strangely fragile. I sat there, the bay breeze blowing through my skirt, my mind blank. Tonight, all I wished for was to breathe deeply, freely, without thinking about my family name, or what would become the next mark on the heritage tapestry my family was proud of. But I knew that dream was a luxury here. People tend to think that failure is loud, that there must be a loud noise, a bang, a cry, or at least a burst of pent-up rage. But the moment when everything really fell apart for me was strangely quiet, like a soft call from the twilight, when the streets were empty, but my heart was still restless. That night, I left the party half tired, half bewildered, my high heels cutting into my ankles as I hurried down the empty street. Chelsea's text message flashed across my screen, my heart racing with each reread. Call me back immediately. Big problem. My little shop on Thames Street, which I had once proudly called my dream, now stood cold under the dim yellow light. I opened the door, expecting to see Chelsea with her usual optimistic smile, but instead I was met with chaos. The floor was littered with papers, the counter was open, the safe was empty. A neighboring florist, Mr. Mitchell, tapped me on the shoulder, looking concerned. Meredith, the salespeople have been looking for you all afternoon. Everyone's been asking for your bills, but the shop is closed, and Chelsea is nowhere to be seen. I stiffened, trying to keep my composure. There must be some misunderstanding. I'll call them right back. A bad feeling welled up inside me. I called Chelsea again and again. Each time, I got only the cold sound of voicemail. I checked my bank account on my phone, a tiny balance that wouldn't cover any shipments, let alone utilities, rent, employee salaries. My email was flooded with overdue notices, debt reminders, and legal threats from suppliers. I leaned against the wall, my palms cold. All the hope, all the months of nurturing my little corner had turned to dust in just one night. Chelsea, the person I once trusted like a sister, hadn't left a single message. In a panic, I could only call my mother. The phone screen lit up, and her voice rang out on the other end, very calm. Go home, Meredith. The Kavanaugh family never fails in public. The sentence sounded more like a cold sentence than a consolation. The next morning, Newport seemed to know everything before I did. Before I could leave my room, I heard a whisper in the kitchen. The Kavanaugh girl was ruined by her own ambition. Harriet, my mother's best friend, was probably the first to spread the news. I'm sorry for Meredith, she said sympathetically, but young people have to learn how to fail. The whole town seemed to have my mishap as a topic for breakfast. My mother kept her impeccable appearance, silk robe, hair up, eyes unwavering. You've embarrassed us, Meredith. There's nothing worse than all of Newport thinking a Kavanaugh doesn't keep his word. My father stood in the doorway of his study, not even looking at me, but sighing. We trusted you enough. The words polite, proper, but more cruel than any curse. My small apartment downtown was repossessed. The lease was in the family's name. My credit cards were canceled overnight, leaving only a brief notice from the bank. My car was gone from the garage. My mother said, "You don't need it for now." I returned to the estate, no longer Meredith the self-made, but a textbook example of what happens when pride overwhelms reason. The house was big, the garden beautiful, everything neat and yet chillingly cold. I walked down the long hallway, each ancestral portrait a silent reminder, don't forget who you are. On the outside, my parents appeared devoted parents. They greeted visitors, smiled, and repeated the mantra, we are always there for our daughter. But behind closed doors, it was a never-ending family courtroom. They didn't need to shout. The coldness in my mother's voice, my father's distant gaze, was enough to stifle any plea. I realized the estate was now like a gilded prison. No chains, no locks, only invisible rules that held my freedom. The right to make mistakes was taken away, even when those mistakes were the most valuable lessons I had ever learned. June, my sister, appeared quietly in the doorway as I sat by the window, gazing out over the silvery bay in the afternoon. She said nothing, just sat down quietly next to me, holding my hand for a few minutes of silence. Then she pulled a small envelope from her pocket and whispered, as if afraid someone would hear. "They have made a decision about your future. I think you should read this." June's eyes were filled with both pity and fear. I took the envelope, my hand shaking not from the cold, but from the knowledge that all my autonomy had officially ended here. Sitting alone in my old room, I opened the envelope with a pounding heart, and inside were the cold words, a plan for honor reform, a life controlled down to every breath. On the outside, the whole town would think the Kavanaughs always support their daughters, but on the inside I felt a deep, nameless, formless loss, as if I had lost myself to the family rules that I had learned from a young age never to be broken. I know, it's just the beginning. There were ultimatums that were not shouts, not angry outbursts outside the door, but cold music playing softly in the air, blending with the clink of knives and forks on the dining table and the looks no one dared to look at. That evening, I sat at the head of the long table in the Kavanaugh's house, in the pale yellow light covering the white tablecloth that seemed to erase all traces of emotion. In this house, everything important was discussed like a business deal. Only this time, the deal was me. Dinner passed with indifferent questions about the weather, plans for the garden, and compliments on the roast chicken, the taste of which I knew no one really cared about. No mention of my shop, no inquiry into my state of mind after all that had happened. Only when the maid cleared away the last plate did my mother, Lorraine, leisurely set down her glass of wine, looking straight at me with a smile that was just polite enough. "We need to talk," she said softly. My father, Arthur, crossed his legs, the same composed posture I had grown accustomed to since my youth. In our family, safety comes first, he had taught me. But it was then that I realized, sometimes safety is just a wrapper for control. The air in the living room became heavy when Emmett Russo, the family's longtime attorney, appeared with a thick file. I sat silently in the armchair, June in the corner, her anxious eyes looking at me as if searching for a way out for her sister. Emmett cleared his throat, sliding the contract across the polished table toward me. My mother said, reading from a rehearsed script, "Meredith, this is the only solution if you want to keep anything of yourself. Eli Chandler is a good man, steady, humble. A chance to redeem yourself to your family and to society." I read through the densely printed pages, the pledges of property, the terms of marriage, personal responsibility, and proper behavior. Each clause was a slice of freedom, each signature a step away from my true self. I looked around silently, hoping someone would break the silence, but my father only sighed, and my mother kept her thin smile. June clutched her sleeve, but she said nothing. I didn't want to sign. Every nerve in me was tense. I wanted to scream, bang the table, cry. But I knew there was no way out. My family had locked every door, home, finances, friends. "If you don't agree, we'll have to let you be responsible for your choice. And you know, in Newport, no one survives without family." My mother spoke softly, as if this was the right thing to do to save me from myself. The first meeting with Eli Chandler, the future husband they had chosen for me, took place in a small downtown diner, the kind of place where no one pays attention to anyone, suitable for arranging things that no one wants to know about. Eli walked in neatly dressed, with the slightly awkward gait of someone used to being out of the spotlight. He was polite, spoke just enough, and showed no particular emotion when I asked, "Do you really want this?" He just smiled and replied softly, "Sometimes life chooses for you." I sensed no ambition in Eli, no desire to change his fate. I wondered if he was another victim of some kind of safety or simply someone who knew how to nod to social pressure. Back at home, I sat down at the family meeting. Lorraine spoke like a project manager giving a progress update. Eli has agreed. The wedding will take place when everything is ready. Everything will be arranged properly. Emmett repeated the terms one last time. It was all like a rehearsed speech, with no room for surprise or personal questions. June stood in the doorway, her eyes wide and sad. I looked at her as if to borrow the courage I had lost somewhere along the way. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking, and skimmed the first page before signing the last line. No one said anything, just the dry sound of the paper rubbing against the table, like the sound of a prison door latch. June ran to me, hugged me, and whispered, "I'm sorry, sister." I tried. I hugged her, knowing that in this house, rebellion or obedience was already written in the script. Before I could take a breath, the door to my room flew open. Harriet, always there to pick up the latest scoop, came in with a big smile, her hair pulled back, her voice ringing. "Congratulations, everyone. This is going to be a big deal in Newport. I'll stop by the morning club tomorrow to share the good news." My mother nodded with satisfaction, as if she had just completed a big deal. I stood in the corner, suddenly realizing, even as I struggled, what I had done was only part of a larger story, written by someone else. The rebellion, the failure, and now the honor reform, all were just small chapters in the book of the Kavanaugh family. And I, no matter how hard I tried, had never once held the pen myself. Some people say that a wedding is the beginning of a new chapter, a journey of love, a place where promises are tied to laughter and affectionate eyes. But for me, that wedding day was not the beginning, but a light ending, quietly closing old dreams and starting something that I never dared to think of. That morning, Newport was shrouded in a thin mist. I sat silently in front of the mirror while June quietly brushed my hair. There were no white dresses, no bright bouquets. The dress my mother had chosen for me was a simple ivory, no pearls, no extra lace, so simple that I felt like I was preparing for a formal gathering rather than the big day of my life. Lorraine walked in, her eyes both scrutinizing and instructing. "Today is the day you have to show what you've learned. People will look at you to see if the Kavanaughs are truly modest." June squeezed my hand, her eyes uncertain, but in the end it was just a hug. "Just breathe, it will pass." I laughed weakly, wishing I had the courage to cry. But in this house, tears only make people feel more awkward, and true feelings are always covered up under a layer of proper politeness. The church was at the end of a small street, its roof discolored by the wind and rain, its sanctuary simple, no pews full of people, no choir, just a few soft songs blaring over the speakers. The guest list had been cut to a minimum, no close friends, just familiar faces from the small town who knew when to clap and when to click their tongues in sympathy. Lorraine stood close to me, making sure everything went according to procedure, while Arthur sat in the front row looking neither happy nor sad, just like he was waiting for the obligatory ceremony to end. Eli stood silently above, his eyes filled with nothing but patience. His mother, Edith Chandler, appeared in a cream-colored knitted sweater, a sincere smile on her face. As I entered, Edith squeezed my hand and whispered, "Welcome, son. There's not much here, but I hope you'll find it comfortable." I nodded, my heart heavy with unspoken words. The ceremony was brief, the pastor reading the familiar prayers. When I got to the yes part, I heard my own voice, small and hoarse, echoing from somewhere far away. There were no fireworks, no cheers. Just the wind whistling through the church doors and a numbing sense of isolation. Eli silently led me to the car. No one held my hand. No close friend came to whisper comforting words. The smiles I received were forced, even pitying looks from the older ladies. The small party was held in Eli's apartment, a clean, orderly space, but coldly empty. The sheer curtains did little to shield the guests from the scrutiny of their guests. Edith brought out a small box and placed it in my hands, a handkerchief embroidered with my name in blue thread, the stitches uneven but meaningful. "I made this when I found out you two were getting married. Consider it a welcome from the Chandlers. Think of it as a starting point. It doesn't have to be perfect." I thanked her, feeling suddenly relieved. Perhaps, of all the people here, Edith was the only one who truly cared about my feelings. The reception passed in a flurry of pleasantries. Harriet arrived, always the first to catch a glimpse of the town. "Congratulations, Meredith," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I hear you're a model of repentance." I tried to smile, knowing full well that, in everyone's eyes, I was merely a living example of a family lesson. Arrogance has its consequences. The climax came after most of the others had left. Lorraine came and stood in the doorway, looking me over. "This is where you belong now," she said, her voice low. "Make the most of it. Don't let us down again." Her words were a final sentence. The door closed behind her, not only separating me from the past, but also extinguishing the last shred of hope that I still belonged there. Arthur patted my shoulder, and June only dared to look at me from a distance, as if afraid to get too close and spread her sister's sadness. As night fell, Eli and I cleaned up in silence. He didn't say much, just asked if I needed anything. I shook my head and walked toward my new room, where everything was so orderly it was unfamiliar. It was my first night sleeping as the wife of someone I barely knew, in an apartment that bore no trace of me. I suddenly discovered that Eli's study had a small, locked drawer. While I was rearranging the books on the desk, I came across a folded piece of paper, loosely placed under the table lamp. The note was just a few words written in clear, firm handwriting. "Not everything here is what it seems." I read it over and over again, curious and uneasy. Did he feel like he was part of this play too? Or was there something else I didn't know? Lying in my new bed, I stared up at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock. I thought back to my childhood, when I dreamed of a wedding filled with laughter, flowers, and warm hugs. Now that dream was closed like the door to my mother's house tonight, forever behind me. The first night I became Eli Chandler's wife, I lost all the privileges that had been taken for granted in the Kavanaugh household. But as darkness settled in the room, I wondered, would I ever find myself again in this strange place? Or would I forever be just a character in someone else's story? My new life did not begin with a bang, nor did it have any bright spots. Instead, it opened with the hum of the air conditioner in my old apartment, the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen, and the morning sun filtering through the sheer curtains. I woke up one strange morning, still groggy, to find myself in a different world, a world without my mother's familiar knock on the door, without June sneaking into my room to whisper secrets, without anything planned for me anymore. I walked out of the bedroom, awkwardly watching Eli making coffee with the old machine. He turned back, just nodded, and handed me a steaming cup. We sat across from each other, each absorbed in our own thoughts in an awkward atmosphere. I didn't know how to start a conversation, so I focused on the hum of the air conditioner, the gentle clatter of spoons and cups, and the silence that stretched between two strangers. My mother's words kept ringing in my head, "You'll never survive without our safety net." Turns out, she was half right. I wasn't dead, but I wasn't really alive either. My new routine began as a series of small, seemingly silly challenges that made me feel like a clumsy child, doing laundry without knowing which setting to choose, burning a pot, and struggling to record every penny spent in the little notebook Edith had given me. Eli didn't complain, nor did he offer to help me when I failed. He just stood back, silently watching me, letting me fumble. Once I asked him, "Aren't you going to help me?" He smiled and simply replied, "No one learns to swim by just watching the water." That made me both angry and embarrassed, but I later felt grateful to him for giving me the freedom to try and make mistakes. The small apartment became a world unto itself, a place where I learned to live simply, to fold towels neatly, to try to cook an omelet for the 5th time, and to get used to the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the hallway. There were mornings when I stood by the window, watching the neighbors hurrying off to work, thinking about a life that had revolved around parties, fancy dresses, and compliments. Here I was alone, facing my Kavanaugh-clad self. One afternoon, there was a gentle knock on the door. Mrs. Farrell, an elderly downstairs neighbor, appeared with a steaming pot of stew. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said. "Everyone here has had to start over at least once." She sat down to drink tea, talked about her husband's death, about learning to drive at age 50, about dinners alone, and then laughed. "Happiness is often smaller than you think." I looked at her, suddenly realizing how grateful I was for people who didn't judge, but simply reached out. Not long after, Edith stopped by, bringing a jar of homemade apricot jam and stories of raising Eli alone. "I thought I would never be strong enough to be a single mother," she said, her eyes looking far away, "but every day I kept going. One day I realized that no one expected me to be strong alone forever." Edith's stories helped me see myself as small, but also close to who I really was, not having to meet the Kavanaughs. Just being myself was enough. June showed up one Saturday afternoon, carrying her mother's apple pie and her eyes filled with concern. She pulled me out onto the balcony and whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded, answering honestly for the first time, "I think I'm getting better." June smiled, holding my hand. "I always believed you could do it. No matter what people say, you deserve your own happiness, no matter how small." That sentence echoed in my mind for days to come, like a small promise to keep. The highlight of the week was a small dinner with Eli and Edith. At first, the atmosphere was awkward, but when Edith told the story of how Eli broke a neighbor's window as a child and then took the blame, the whole table burst into laughter. For the first time since my marriage, I felt truly at ease. I might never have the perfect family my mother wanted, but who knows, maybe true happiness is just peaceful moments like these, simple, unpretentious, but very real. That night, while cleaning the kitchen, I found an envelope hidden under the mat by the front door. It had no sender. I opened it, and inside was a small stack of documents, some photos of bank transactions, printed emails, and a scribbled note. "Meredith Kavanaugh lost everything by accident." My heart pounded. The details: an unfamiliar bank account, an email to Chelsea Doyle, my former partner, the date and time that matched when everything started to fall apart. I sat down on the floor, a cold feeling running down my spine. Was my collapse not just the lesson in humility that my family wanted me to learn? Had someone deliberately pushed me into this situation, and was I just a pawn in a bigger game? That night, I lay awake for a long time. But instead of fear, I felt something rising inside me, a desire to know the truth, a desire to determine my own destiny. I suddenly understood that home is not where you grow up, nor is it just where others tell you to belong. Home, perhaps, is the place you are determined to rebuild after everything falls apart, even if it starts small. There were mornings when the light from my small apartment window could not dispel the feeling of unease that was simmering inside me. I looked at Eli, my silent and attentive husband, and wondered how much about him I did not know. The world, it turned out, was not only complicated out there, but even in this house, there were layers of mystery that were hard to predict. I sat in my living room, spreading the mysterious envelope and documents out on the table. With great care, I went through each invoice, each printed email, each note, trying to piece together the murky puzzle. One name came up more often than I remembered: Chelsea Doyle. My old partner, the one I'd trusted when we started the store. But now Chelsea's name appeared alongside strange wire transfers, midnight emails, transactions directly linked to Emmett Russo, my family's longtime attorney. I suddenly remembered the note Eli had left on our wedding day. Not everything here is as it seems. At the time, I had thought it was just his way of comforting me about my arranged marriage. But now, each word resonated differently, clearly. There were more secrets than I had thought. These thoughts would not leave me alone. While Eli was out at work, I borrowed his office key on the pretext of needing his computer. While cleaning, I discovered the locked drawer that I had accidentally touched last time. I tried shaking it gently, but nothing moved. Even my stubbornness only left me with a lingering curiosity. I decided to seek help. The first person I thought of was Virginia Harlow, my former college counselor. Virginia was the kind of person everyone felt comfortable with, calm in her voice, sharp in her eyes, always asking questions before giving advice. I arranged to meet her at the small coffee shop down the street that had been my regular haunt during my college years. Virginia listened as I told her everything: the envelopes, the money transfers, Chelsea's mysterious disappearance, the locked drawer in Eli's room. She didn't laugh or offer any superficial comfort, just put her hand on mine and asked, "Meredith, who do you believe in this story?" I smiled sadly, admitting I wasn't sure. Maybe I've never really trusted anyone but myself, but maybe even I don't know myself. She nodded. Doubt is a strange gift. It makes you dig deeper into the truth, but if you hold on to it, it can also make you lose the good things. Virginia reminded me to stay calm, to figure things out, but not to let the confusion pull me away from the present. I felt lighter, knowing that I still had someone to lean on and seek advice from. In the afternoon, I went to the local library, where the quiet, old paper smell and soft yellow light were enough to make things less stressful. I searched for articles and information related to Chelsea and Emmett Russo. A young librarian, recognizing me as the Kavanaugh girl, was happy to help. She showed me archives and articles about my mother's charities. Remarkably, Chelsea had been involved in a project with that organization just a few months before my store collapsed. As I held the printed copies of these articles in my hands, it began to dawn on me. Chelsea was more than just a business partner who had disappeared. She was also a link in a much more complex chain of relationships between my family, charities, and people I thought I knew well. That night, I sat in the living room, pretending to watch TV while my eyes followed Eli. He had just finished a phone call, his voice lower and more reserved than usual, and he hung up quickly when I appeared. His mystery made me uneasy. I remembered the last time I found the drawer locked and the note he had left. I wanted to believe that Eli was a good husband, the only person in this story who had nothing to do with my downfall. But part of me couldn't ignore the feeling that something about him was unclear. Unable to bear it any longer, I walked over to him, looked straight into Eli's eyes, and asked softly but firmly, "Can you tell me the truth? About everything. That locked drawer, those secret phone calls, even the note you left on our wedding day. What is it that I shouldn't know?" Eli was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on me. Then he sighed, "Meredith, I promise I'll tell you everything, but not now. You deserve to know everything, just until I'm sure, okay?" His voice was earnest, but his refusal made me even more nervous. Perhaps true trust is forged in moments of uncertainty like these. I returned to my room, my mind in turmoil. Who should I believe, Eli, Virginia, the evidence on the table, or my own confused emotions? I remembered Virginia's words, that doubt could either save or destroy a person. Late at night, as I sat down at my desk, my phone rang. A text message appeared, an unfamiliar number, but easy to recognize. "Come see me alone. I have something you need to hear." It was Chelsea. The old memories, the pain of betrayal, came flooding back. But this time, I was no longer the weak Meredith, waiting for others to decide. I looked out the window, seeing my reflection blend into the city lights. Somewhere out there, the truth was still waiting to be revealed, and I was, finally, ready to face it, even if my faith might be tested once more. The people I know best sometimes hold the deepest secrets, and perhaps it is in these uncertain moments that I will learn to believe in something greater than myself. There are days when the past is like a persistent rain, coming back just when I think I'm dry and at peace. I meet Chelsea in a hidden corner of a small cafe, where the smell of roasted coffee and waffles fills the air. The room is empty, save for a few people silently bowing their heads over their phones. I sit and wait, my palms cold even though it's still summer outside. Chelsea was late. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes had lost their usual confidence, replaced by a furtive, tired look. Even her handshake was half-hearted, as if she was afraid someone would see it. The barista brought 2 cappuccinos and discreetly retreated to the counter. I didn't beat around the bush. Why did you disappear? And why did you let this happen to me? I heard my voice crack, unable to hide the hurt. Chelsea looked out the window, her voice almost a whisper. Meredith, I'm sorry. I didn't do it on my own. Someone put pressure on me. They knew everything from my old debts to the fact that I'd falsified my books for clients. They used it all to force me to make a choice. She paused, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. I was speechless. Who are they? The question was already on my lips, waiting to be asked. Lorraine, Chelsea said softly, looking up at me, her eyes begging for forgiveness. And Emmett. They wanted to make sure you came home, that you would pay. They even promised to help me pay off my debt if I cooperated, and backed out in time. They sent people to threaten me, Meredith. I had no choice. She choked, covering her face with her hands, shame and despair mixed together. There was a new pain rising inside me, betrayal not just from a friend, but from my own family. I didn't know whether to feel anger or pity. Every reason, every story seemed to lead back to a small circle of power and control. Everything I had ever believed in was shaking violently. Can you testify? I asked, hoping against the last shred of Chelsea's conscience. She shook her head firmly. I'll lose everything, Meredith. I'm scared, you know? They still have evidence of what I did. Her shoulders slumped. I'm so sorry. I nodded, knowing that the apology was not enough to mend what had been broken. When Chelsea left, I was alone in the shop, my coffee cold in front of me. The barista looked at me sympathetically, discreetly clearing the table next to me, as if to give me space to think. It was dark when I left the cafe. The streetlights cast a yellow glow on the patchy sidewalk. The feeling that someone was watching me made me look back. My heart beat faster. The darkness seemed to wrestle with nameless doubts. I walked faster, my hands shaking as I typed on my phone. Just then, June called, her voice worried. Sis, I'm worried about you tonight. Is something wrong? I could hear the genuine concern in her voice. I told her about the meeting, about how betrayed and scared I felt. June paused for a moment, then said firmly, no matter what happens, I'm on your side. I promise I won't let anyone hurt you again. Sometimes, just a simple word from a loved one is enough to make me feel like I'm not completely alone in a world of secrets and lies. I arrived home, half nervous and half exhausted. The lights were still on in the apartment. Eli stood in the doorway, his eyes full of concern. He didn't say much, just silently pulled me into his arms. His gentleness was the only thing that made me forget the chaos outside, but it also raised new conflicts. How could I trust when everything around me was hiding something? I just want you to be safe, he whispered. Whether you believe it or not, I'll be here. I wanted to trust him, but between layers of secrets, trust wasn't easy to find. Just as I was getting dressed, the doorbell rang. A polite courier handed me a thick envelope stamped with the elegant seal of the Newport Historical Society. Inside was an invitation to the biggest party of the summer, with Meredith Kavanaugh's name in bold print, clearly stating, "The honored daughter." I stared at the card, stunned, a mixture of emotions surging through me: pride, resentment, insecurity. My family, after all, still wanted to use me to enhance their reputation. Once again, I was being pulled back into the eye of the storm, a tool for their pursuit of perfection. I put the card on the table, wondering what loyalty really is. Does it always mean protecting and sheltering loved ones even if it means sacrificing yourself? Or is loyalty sometimes the thing that prevents us from seeing the truth, the sharpest double-edged sword we can hold in our hands? That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Chelsea, about June, about Eli, about my family, and about myself, trying to piece together my broken life, piece by piece, in the darkness of doubt and glimmers of hope. There is perhaps no place more revealing than a ballroom, where all secrets are ready to be revealed under the bright lights. The morning before the party, I woke up earlier than usual, my palms sweating at the thought of facing the entire town of Newport and, most of all, my own family. In Virginia's cozy apartment, I sat in an old armchair, listening to the clock ticking in the silence. Virginia looked at me, her eyes both stern and gentle. "If you want your story back, Meredith, you'll have to take the microphone yourself. Don't let anyone else set the script for you." Her words echoed in my mind, reminding me of the task I was about to face. Eli arrived with a hot cup of coffee and an encouraging look in his eyes. "I know you're scared, but I've never seen you this strong." He took my hand and squeezed it. I leaned against his shoulder for a moment, feeling his simple steadiness. It made me believe, if only a little, that I could do it. We sat down with Virginia to plan each step. Eli carefully laid out all the possibilities. If Lorraine tried to interrupt my speech, if Emmett tried to divert attention, if Chelsea got dragged in. Virginia analyzed the situation, outlined contingency plans to keep Chelsea out of trouble. Each person was part of my little squad, each idea making me feel less alone. June was involved in other ways, too. She quietly gave me insider information, details that only insiders knew. A brief text message, a note tucked under the door. "Mom is working on a speech. We'll try to restore your image, but be careful." She never said outright that she was on my side, but I sensed her silent support. In the afternoon, Eli and I walked through Newport's historic downtown. The soft yellow sunlight filtered through the old trees, and the shops were decorated with fresh flowers and red, white, blue flags. I felt small among the crowd, but I also realized that each step I took today had its own meaning. Back at Virginia's apartment, I began practicing my speech, not the flowery words my mother had taught me, but my true voice. I wrote and erased, spoke and revised, searching for a way to express myself that would neither hurt anyone nor avoid the truth. Eli sat patiently, listening to my stumbles, giving me gentle feedback, showing me how to look directly at the person I was speaking to. Before dinner, Edith Chandler arrived. She brought homemade apple pie, the scent of cinnamon filling the small living room. She sat down beside me, holding my hand like a true mother. "Meredith, courage isn't the absence of fear," she said softly. "It's standing up and telling the truth, even if your voice shakes." She chuckled. "I believe in you, my daughter. It's not your blood that defines you, it's your heart and your courage that do." Edith's words of encouragement were like a warm hug on a winter day. I couldn't remember the last time my mother had held my hand so gently. Suddenly, my eyes stung. While Eli and I were getting dressed for the ball, I decided on a simple turquoise dress, one I had picked out, not my mother's. It was a small decision, but to me it was a declaration that from now on, I would take responsibility for my own choices, even if it was just how I appeared in public. As the night of the party approached, I could feel the tension building in the group. Virginia carefully checked everything: speeches, paperwork, a way out if things got out of hand. Eli buttoned my shirt, smiling reassuringly. June texted, "Sister, remember that no matter what happens, I'm here for you." At the Kavanaughs, Lorraine was still busy preparing everything for my rehabilitation. My mother called me, her voice unusually sweet. "Remember to be humble, Meredith. This is our chance to take back our place." I said yes, filled with an indescribable sadness. To my mother, I was still just another decoration in the family story. Arthur, my father, tried to keep the peace, avoiding any confrontation. He didn't say much, but I knew he cared about me. The way he looked at me, the gentle squeeze of my hand when we parted, told me he understood something deeper was going on. The night before the event, I stood alone in front of the mirror. What stood before me was not the docile Kavanaugh girl, but a woman learning to stand up for herself and speak for herself. I tried to pick up the microphone, my hands shaking, but my heart pounding with determination. Tomorrow, I will stand before everyone and tell my true story. I am not sure if I will win, but I know that the greatest courage I can have is to dare to tell it in my own voice, without hiding or avoiding it. Perhaps, as Virginia once said, there is nothing more courageous than taking the microphone yourself and taking back control of your life story. There are moments in life when even the brightest light fails to illuminate the truth. It only prolongs the darkness behind us. The night of the gala, I stood with Eli in the vast lobby of the Newport Yacht Club. Each luxury car pulled up, each pair of polished shoes stepped onto the red carpet. Each handshake was carefully considered. I adjusted my dress, my hands cold, my heart pounding like a drum under the soft fabric. Sometimes I think I've never really been here, but this time I chose to stand, not retreat. As I entered the great hall, the ceiling was bathed in a dazzling array of chandeliers, reflecting off faces that were familiar yet always foreign to me. In one corner, Lorraine, my mother, was conversing with Harriet and Emmett, her eyes sweeping over me as if examining one last detail of the display. My father, Arthur, politely shook hands with the guests, occasionally turning back to give me a helpless but encouraging look. Virginia came to me, her eyes shining with rare confidence. "You're ready, Meredith," she whispered. "Don't forget, the truth is rarely safe, but it's always right." June was there, too, looming over the serving counter, her eyes encouraging whenever I happened to glance her way. I knew that, in that crowd, I had at least a few people who were truly on my side, enough to keep me from feeling alone. The party began. The orchestra played classical tunes, the ladies held trays of sparkling wine, and soft laughter masked the tension. I straddled two worlds. One was the past associated with the name Kavanaugh, and the other was me today, trying to rewrite my own story. My mother took the stage first, her speech carefully prepared, her voice soft as velvet, but with a power that only Newport elders truly feel. "The Kavanaugh family," she began, "is a testament to unity, perseverance, and commitment to community. We stand together through all the challenges." I knew every word, every comma. She had written them down, recited them over and over again over the past several days. All eyes were on me, as if waiting to see what role I would play in this performance. When it came to the honors, I was invited to the stage. Eli stepped forward, silently took my hand, squeezed it gently, his eyes instilling an indescribable confidence in me. Just that, I had enough courage to step forward. The applause rang out. I could clearly feel the restraint in each beat. I stepped onto the podium. The microphones were ready. The stage lights were shining directly into my eyes. Overwhelmed, but strangely, I could see more clearly all the faces below. both those who loved me and those who had whispered judgments on me. My mother's script was in my pocket, folded neatly like a shield. But I knew I couldn't just repeat someone else's words. Suddenly I remembered Virginia's words, feeling that the truth would never be completely safe, but this time I didn't want to hide. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I held the microphone. Thank you all for being here tonight. Newport is not only where I was born, but where I learned to face myself. I looked up at Lorraine, her eyes filled with hope, a hint of worry. I thanked Eli with a firm handshake. Someone once told me that happiness in this family is measured by legacy, not laughter. I grew up believing that, until everything I built for myself collapsed without me knowing why. I heard a few whispers below, not knowing whose voice. I continued, my voice no longer trembling. I stand here tonight, not to play a chosen role, but to speak the truth, even if it makes me or anyone else uncomfortable. I used to think silence was safe, but it turns out it only perpetuates fear and misunderstanding. In the bright light, I seemed to be left alone with my newly awakened courage. Below, Virginia nodded slightly, June encouraged with her eyes. Eli held my hand, giving me warmth. Lorraine suppressed a small sigh. She had never seen me speak up for myself in public like this. I finished my introduction, ready to delve into long-hidden truths, secrets about the store, about manipulation, about the true value of safety that my family had always valued. But before I continued, I paused, looking down at the room, sensing the thick silence. Someone dropped a glass. The dry clatter of glass against the tile floor echoed, but no one turned around. Everyone waited. In that moment, I understood. Not everyone was ready to accept the truth, but I was ready to say it. And that was the most important thing tonight. I found myself in the light, the darkness behind me stretching, but I was no longer afraid of it. Some stories are only truly life-changing when told out loud, especially when an entire town is hanging on every word. I stood on stage, the spotlight shining so hard that I couldn't see the people below, but I could feel the heat of their eyes on me. In that moment, all the noise died down, leaving only the sound of my breathing and the rapid beating of my heart. I held the microphone, shaking but determined, and looked up at the audience. Eli's words echoed in my head, "Your truth is the one thing your family can't take away from you." It was the only thing that gave me the courage to continue. I want to share with you something I've kept inside for too long. It's time for everyone to know the truth, not just about me, but about what can happen when we let unwritten rules dictate our decisions. I looked over at Lorraine and Arthur and saw my mother frown slightly and my father pursed his lips, his eyes fidgeting. Emmett stood beside me, his face expressionless. I started talking about the store, the place that had been my dream, the fruit of years of hard work. I talked about the payments that had mysteriously disappeared, the accounts that had been drained, the partners who had disappeared. Then I quietly pulled a sheaf of papers from my pocket, a printout of emails between Chelsea, the family lawyer, and a trusted third party. I held it up, my voice no longer shaking. This is evidence of the manipulation behind my failure. I'm not bringing it up for revenge, but to make people understand. Sometimes, even the people closest to us can hurt us the most because they think they know what's best for us. Below, Chelsea began to move through the crowd. I looked at her and with some courage, Chelsea stood. She avoided Lorraine's eyes, shaking but clear, I admit it. I was pressured. I'm sorry, Meredith. A ripple ran through the room. Harriet gasped, my old friends whispered, and the press corps began to rummage through notes, cameras clicking. Lorraine stepped forward, trying to interrupt me in a voice that trembled rarely. What are you doing, Meredith? You're embarrassing your family. Arthur stood frozen, unable to speak. Emmett, his face like a statue, just stared straight at me cold, without a trace of emotion. I didn't back away. Mom, I said, the truth isn't humiliation. Humiliation is when we choose to stay silent, choose to continue our false pretense just to maintain a good image in front of society. I could feel Virginia's sympathetic gaze from afar, Eli's hand clenched under the stage. June leaned out of her seat as if to run to me. I turned to the crowd and said clearly, I am no longer a pawn to be placed wherever I want. I hope that those who were like me, fearful, resigned, forced to live by other people's standards, will stand up for themselves. It may be painful, it may cost us the approval of those we love, but only by living our truth can we be truly liberated. I took a deep breath and concluded with a sentence I believe I will never forget. I no longer belong to the image my family wants me to have. From today on, I live my own life. The audience erupted, not in applause, but in excitement, shock, and an atmosphere thick with surprise, shock, and sympathy. Some applauded, some murmured in discontent, but I knew, whatever the outcome, I had done what I needed to do for myself. I left the stage, feeling both relieved and troubled. As I walked backstage, Lorraine rushed toward me, her face white with anger and frustration. Her voice shook, a tremble she had never felt before. You've ruined us all, Meredith. Do you think a speech will wash anything away? I looked her straight in the eye, no longer afraid. No, Mom. But at least I won't have to pretend anymore. Arthur approached silently, his hand trembling as he tried to touch my shoulder, but stopped. Emmett just bowed his head and walked past, Harriet brushing past, not daring to look at me. In a corner, Eli was waiting. He said nothing, just gave me a silent hug, gentler than any words of comfort. I knew that after tonight, I would have to face new consequences, the press, gossip, the rejection of an entire community that only cares about appearances, but I also knew that sometimes, to free myself, I had to accept the price of loneliness, of trading away everything I once thought was safe. As the crowd began to disperse, the chatter, criticism, and sympathy mixed together. I stepped out into the Newport night, the sea breeze salty and cold, but I felt strangely relieved, like someone who has finally shed an armor that doesn't belong to him. Perhaps that is the only price worth paying for freedom. The aftermath of the truth wasn't silence, it was a rush of voices, old alliances shifting like sand underfoot in a rising tide. The morning after the party, I woke up in Eli's small apartment, the shock of the night still echoing in my heart. The sky over Newport dawned gray, as if the town itself were heaving a sigh after a great shock. The phone started ringing early that morning, not just one, but a series of messages and missed calls. Some were from people I thought I would never talk to again. Some were reporters, a few apologies mixed in with veiled criticism. My name was plastered across the community bulletin board. Meredith Kavanaugh, shocking revelations at Newport Gala, young entrepreneur defies convention, scandal or courage? I sat in my kitchen, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, reading each line, both relieved and bewildered by the speed at which things had turned. The press no longer presented my family as a solid unit. The articles were divided. One side was sympathetic, praising my courage and emphasizing personal responsibility in modern society. The other, led by writers close to Lorraine, tried to defend her image, blaming me for hurting the people I loved most. Arthur had all but disappeared from the scene. My father, who had always been a man of good manners in public, had suddenly withdrawn from the limelight, refusing to answer his phone calls, including mine. Lorraine had isolated herself on the estate, keeping the gates closed, seeing no one but her lawyer. Emmett, normally composed, was caught in a whirlwind of legal questions and public opinion, his position no longer as secure as it had been. Eli was always there, a steady, silent presence. He didn't ask how I was feeling, just put another cup of coffee on the table when I was too dizzy to make my own. Edith Chandler came by mid-morning, bearing homemade apple pie and a few short but warm words. "This is a reward for honesty, Meredith." Not everyone can face it. Virginia stopped by, too, put her arm around me at the door, and whispered, "You've started a new chapter, whether you like it or not." I received new offers of collaboration from small businesses in the area, from women's organizations I had only heard about in the news. They asked me to share my story, to co-host workshops, and some even asked me to co-invest in new projects. A strange feeling spread through me. It turns out that when you dare to step out of the shadows, the light can open unexpected doors. Meanwhile, June called me, her voice both nervous and happy. "I've decided, Meredith. I'm leaving the farm. I need to learn to stand on my own 2 feet, not be a shadow in that house forever." I listened with both joy and worry. My sister, who had always been quiet, was now the first person to dare to change after me. June texted, "If you need me, I'm here. We can start over without anyone defining it for us." The day passed in a bustling yet isolating atmosphere. Outside, people were buzzing. Everyone had an opinion about me. Inside, I struggled with a sense of loss. A whole part of my life, relationships that I had thought were irreplaceable, were either gone or standing on a completely new frontier. But in the midst of the pain, I felt myself growing lighter, as if someone had just removed a heavy shell that had been clinging to my shoulders for years. That afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation to meet my father, Arthur. It was a short message, "Meredith, if you're ready, I'd like to see you alone." I was confused, both expectant and fearful. Perhaps he wanted to apologize, or simply understand how things had gotten this far. I agreed to meet, not knowing whether to hope or to guard against another battle. Before I could sort out my emotions, Eli placed his hand on my shoulder, looking at me with a calm gaze. "No one can change the past, Meredith. But how we live with it is the only choice we truly have." Those words echoed in my head, a reminder of why I had chosen this path, not for revenge, but for my own liberation. Late that evening, a letter appeared in the apartment mailbox from Lorraine, my mother. Her handwriting was familiar, neat, careful, but this time with an unfamiliar tremor. "Meredith, I want to talk. Alone. With no one else." I held the paper, feeling like I was holding a piece of family history, light and heavy, hopeful and uncertain. I sat there for a long time, watching the city lights come on, my heart filled with unanswered questions. After letting go of the roles that others had assigned me, I suddenly realized something simple yet profound. Only when we dare to be ourselves will we know who will truly choose to stay by our side, whether it is our family or a stranger who happens to pass by our lives. No conversation is more difficult than one that should have happened years ago. That was my first thought as I sat across from my mother in the small tea room on the edge of Newport, where the old windows cast golden shadows across the varnished wood table. Outside, the sea rustled, reminding me of the many times as a child I longed to hear my mother whisper, "I'm proud of you," but never came. We chose a corner far away from prying eyes. I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a private conversation, perhaps when I was a kid, waiting for Mom to finish her work calls. Today, Lorraine showed up with dark circles under her eyes, her face still carefully made up, as if she were gearing up for battle, not an apology. Mom ordered black tea, I ordered chamomile. Neither of us spoke as the waiter set the cups down on the table. For a long moment, there was only the soft clinking of spoons against cups, and then Mom spoke first, her voice small but firm. "I know you're angry. But everything I did was for you, for our family." I looked at Mom, for the first time not as a little girl who needed to be protected, but as someone who had completed a journey of self-liberation. "Don't you think those decisions hurt me?" I asked, keeping my voice even. You always say you're protecting me, but what are you really protecting? My family, my reputation, or an unrealistic image of perfection? Lorraine frowned slightly, her lips trembling. You don't understand, Meredith. The world is never kind to people like us if we don't control our stories. I just want you to be safe. I just want what's best for you. Her voice rose, then dropped, as if her reasons no longer held any weight. I touched the teacup lightly, the scent of chamomile wafting in, contrasting with the tense atmosphere. Maybe you thought the best thing for me was to control everything instead of letting me make mistakes and learn to stand up for myself. But did you know that the only thing I ever wanted was for you to be proud of me, not because I was right, but because I dared to be myself? Mom was silent. For a moment, I saw a soft pain in her eyes, different from her usual coldness. She tried to speak, but it took her a long time to say, I'm sorry if you feel like you're not good enough, Meredith. It wasn't a perfect apology, nor was it complete forgiveness. But it was real. We sat in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. I suddenly remembered the times my mother had taught me how to arrange flowers, how to choose a dress for a party, how to greet each guest at a large meal. All of those lessons, it turned out, were just superficial. What I really needed was a hug, a word of recognition. But I also understood that my mother was a product of a different generation, a generation that saw resilience as silent endurance, that saw love as control, not acceptance. I don't expect you to understand everything or approve of every decision I make, Mom, I said, feeling as relieved as someone had just uncorked a bottle. I didn't do it to defy you, but to be myself. And now I'm proud of it. Lorraine looked at me, her eyes unblinking for the first time. She dabbed at them with a tissue, trying to keep her composure. You're a grown woman, Meredith. Maybe I was scared to realize it too late. No one won, no one lost, just the truth, naked, painful, but also healthier than anything I'd ever had with my mother. We left the bar, and the air felt lighter. I no longer felt the need to force myself to please my mother. I no longer craved recognition that I knew wouldn't come the way I wanted. I let go of that need, no longer letting it control my life. On the porch, Eli waited, leaning against a lamppost, his face both stern and gentle. As I approached, he put a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "News, Meredith. Something is about to change for us." His eyes held not just anticipation, but the promise of a new beginning, one free from the shadow of the past. I glanced back at my mother one last time, meeting her sad gaze, no longer a commanding gaze, but a quiet acceptance. And that was enough. True freedom, I realized, was not forgiveness or approval. It was letting go of the need for it, to move forward on the path I had chosen alone, but no longer alone. Not every new beginning comes with a grand gesture. Sometimes they come in quiet, everyday moments. I no longer live in a world of applause or attention. Instead, the dawn in Eli's small apartment opens with the aroma of coffee and the familiar clink of kitchen utensils, reminding me of Edith's quote, "You build a real life in an ordinary morning." Since the party, things have calmed down. I've spent more time with Virginia on the new store. We're not rushing. Virginia insists that, this time, it's all up to me, that every tile, every color scheme, every item of merchandise reflects who I am. Some mornings I'm laughing to myself as I mop the floors, because someone once told me I'd never survive outside this safety net of my family. But now, the little challenges, finding a plumber, checking price lists, learning how to do bookkeeping, make me proud. June also moved out to live on her own, in a small apartment not far from my house. She blossomed in a way I had never seen before, as if she were breathing her own air. Some afternoons, we would meet at a corner cafe, simply sitting together, telling each other about the little troubles of the day, the noisy neighborhood kids, the unusually loud washing machine, the grumpy shop owner. I realized that sisterly affection doesn't always require loud words, but just a nod, a sympathetic smile is enough. Eli, the quiet man, warmed me with little gestures. He knew I preferred soft yellow lights to cold white ones, so he changed the light bulbs all over the apartment. One day when I came home late, he had prepared my favorite stew, placed a copy of the local newspaper next to a cup of hot tea, as if that alone would make the world right. Sometimes I sat and watched him work on his desk, silently grateful that he had chosen to stay and that he had chosen me. The Newport community, which had been reserved, began to open up to me. They no longer saw me as the Kavanaugh girl, but as a real neighbor. I became more involved in local events, the fall festival, small charity events, or just cooking with Edith to take to Mrs. Farrell next door. Every time I was called to help, I felt warm inside because for the first time in my life, I belonged here not because someone had arranged it, but because I wanted to. Opening the new store was a gentle but meaningful journey. Virginia was a patient guide, never pushing me, just reminding me, do whatever feels right. We chose the name Second Bloom, a name that said it all. I was blooming again, in my own way. On the opening day, June and Edith helped me set up everything. Eli prepared the tea and cake counter, and Virginia personally invited each neighbor. It wasn't a flashy ceremony, but every look, every word of congratulations was genuine. When the town learned that I was on my own, someone invited me to join a small town committee that organized community activities. For the first time, my name was mentioned because of my own ideas, not because of my last name Kavanaugh, but because I was Meredith, someone learning to build a life for herself. The night after the grand opening, I returned home to a small apartment lit with yellow lights. Eli was reading. June sent a congratulatory text. Edith called to ask if I wanted to come over for dinner this weekend. I could feel the peace creeping in, as if all the pain and loss from the past had become material for a new, lighter chapter. As I was sorting through the stack of receipts at the cash register, Virginia handed me a handwritten envelope. Inside, there were only 3 words. Grand opening? I opened it, and it was my mother's, Lorraine's, handwriting, and for once there were no instructions, no coercion, no agenda, just a sincere question. I'd like to come if you'd like. Just your signature. I put the letter in the drawer next to the bills, smiling. It wasn't an old-fashioned acceptance, no trace of control or calculation. It was like the first green shoot after a long winter, a sign of something softer and more enduring than forgiveness, a choice to make again, out of meaning, not just obligation. At night, I lay next to Eli, his heart beating softly beside me. I thought about success, about a past that was associated with glamorous parties and the looks of others. But now I understood clearly. True success is meaning, waking up every morning knowing that you are truly alive, that you are choosing to love and rebuild your life bit by bit, without applause. I used to believe that family was something fixed, a shell that was set in stone at birth and no one could change it. But now, after all the turmoil, I realize that part of family is actually the people you choose to keep around you, and it's that choice that makes it truly meaningful. On the morning of the store's official opening, Newport seemed to be wearing a new coat. The early autumn air was chilly, the trees outside had turned yellow, and the small path leading to the store was filled with the sound of laughter. I stood inside, rearranging the rows of shiny wooden shelves, listening to June's laughter on the porch. That laughter brought me back to the days when we were children, holding hands and running across the lawn, not caring what the world would think. This time, I didn't have to force myself to keep up a polite smile. Neighbors, Mrs. Farrell, Mr. Whitaker, even the librarians came in, not out of curiosity, but out of genuine concern. Virginia showed up early, carrying a vase of wildflowers and an encouraging smile. Edith carried a tray of fragrant apple pies, joking, "You have to have the smell of pies to make a store run." Eli was always there, silently checking the electrical outlets, adjusting the signs, or simply standing behind me, placing a warm hand on my shoulder, reminding me that I was no longer alone. Arthur came too, in an old but neatly pressed suit. I saw him from a distance, hesitating in the crowd, no longer the distant father he had been. As he approached, his eyes flashed with rare remorse. "Meredith," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly, "I am sorry for not listening to you sooner. I am proud of you, even if it was late." The apology did not erase the hurt, but it was like a gentle stitch over an old wound, allowing me to move on without regret. June introduced her new partner to the family, a smart, funny woman with a peaceful gaze. The small room suddenly filled with laughter, curiosity, and heartfelt well wishes, far removed from the empty pomp of previous family gatherings. Lorraine was there, too, standing silently at the edge of the room. She didn't say anything, didn't try to control or comment. Just her eyes, sometimes looking at me, sometimes looking away. For the first time, I saw my mother as a real person, strong and vulnerable at the same time. Maybe she wasn't ready to enter this new circle, but her quiet presence was a step beyond anything I could have hoped for. Edith and Virginia took turns telling stories about their failures, their struggles, and the small joys they'd picked up over the years. "Family," Edith said, "sometimes all it takes is a pie and 4 people laughing." The words radiated warmth, filling me with gratitude, relief, and even pride. In the evening, Newport's Fall Festival was in full swing in the central square. Lanterns hung everywhere, children ran around, and local food stalls were bustling. Eli, June, and my new friends and I strolled under the red leaves, feeling the light reunion atmosphere I had longed for. It was my turn to speak briefly. Before, when I had held the microphone, I had been a mere shadow of my mother's prepared words. But this time, standing before a crowd of friends, colleagues, neighbors, and the patchwork family I had built, I spoke from my heart. Family is not a place where you are bound, but a place where you are accepted, no matter who you are. I am grateful that I've been able to rewrite that definition for myself and for all of us. When it was over, the entire square applauded, not for the Kavanaugh family's history, but for my own story. Real applause, uncoordinated, unstaged. That night, when I got home, I thought it was all just a beautiful dream. Eli poured me a glass of red wine, sat next to me on the balcony, the twinkling lights reflecting off his hair. He was silent for a moment, then turned and took my hand. "Meredith, we've come a long way. Don't you think it's time to do it all over again? A wedding that's only our choice, no contracts, no conditions. Just 2 people who love each other." I looked into his eyes and saw not just love, but respect, trust, and hope. I smiled and nodded, not because anyone forced me to, not because of tradition, but because I truly wanted to. I used to think of family as an immutable wall, a scripted story. But now, surrounded by people I love, whether blood or by choice, I understand. True family is built on acceptance, kindness, and outstretched hands, not chains of control. And so, I began a new chapter of my life, a chapter where no one was a side character. Everyone was themselves, and I, for the first time, was the author of my own story. After so many years of living with stereotypes, scripts, pressures, and expectations, I never thought I would find myself sitting here in the middle of Edith's backyard, in the early summer sun, feeling so light and free. No more big stage, no more judgmental stares, no more family whispers. Today it was just me, Eli, June, Virginia, Edith, a few close friends, dear neighbors, and an undisguised joy. In the morning, I picked out my own outfit. Not the dress my mother had prepared, not the color that others thought was appropriate, just a simple navy blue dress, a small necklace from Edith, my hair loose and natural. I looked at myself in the mirror and laughed. I had never looked so, myself. Eli stood outside, adjusting the string lights, then sat down with June and Virginia, painstakingly attaching flowers to handmade silk ribbons. June recited the poem she'd written all night, her face both amused and moved. Virginia fiddled with vases of wildflowers, her hands stained with ink, but her eyes sparkling with joy. Neighbors dropped by one, each bringing something homemade, hot clam chowder, apple pies, golden cornbread, even a salad prepared by the youngest neighbor. Mrs. Farrell brought a pot of chamomile tea and said, "Be happy, it's your day." The ceremony began simply. There was no solemn officiant, no choir, just friends and family standing around, holding hands in a small circle. Edith looked at me moved, tears welling up in her eyes, but still smiling brightly. June stepped forward, holding a small piece of paper and tremblingly reading the poem, for those who have lost their way, for hearts brave enough to start over, and for happiness that comes only when we dare to choose for ourselves. No one applauded, but the atmosphere was quiet, filled with empathy and sincerity. Virginia shared a few simple words of congratulations. "Meredith, Eli, you have rewritten your own story. There is no one else here to correct you, no one to guide you. Just you and your faith in each other." I squeezed Eli's hand gently, feeling the warmth spread from my fingers to my heart. The small party started as soon as the ceremony ended. Everyone contributed something, sometimes food, sometimes a joke, sometimes just a hug. Edith baked my favorite traditional apple pie, and in every bite I felt the love I had dreamed of. There was no pomp. No one boasted about their achievements. Everyone just talked, told stories, and occasionally laughed over trivial memories. As the afternoon wore on, Eli pulled me into the middle of the courtyard and played some classical music on the old speakers. First dance, he smiled, holding out his hand like it was the first time we met. Our dance was far from perfect. I stepped on his foot at least 3 times, and he laughed, awkwardly spinning me around in a small circle of friends. But everyone cheered and clapped, and suddenly I felt like a young girl, unburdened, just enjoying the moment. The evening ended with long conversations around the table, soft music, laughter, and even tears of joy. We cleaned up together, still joking, still chatting. No one was in a hurry to leave. Near midnight, when everyone had gone home, I noticed a bouquet of flowers at the end of the table. Simple but elegant, peonies, lavender, and a small note. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. "Hope you find what I never knew how to give." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a silent acknowledgement. I left the letter by the vase, feeling strangely relieved. I no longer needed recognition, but I also no longer felt like a child who had to fight for every scrap of love. When everything was cleaned up, Eli and I sat on the steps, finishing our last cup of tea. He looked at me, smiling happily. "I never thought this day would come, Meredith. The day you are truly free, and also the day we can call each other family in our own way." I leaned my head on his shoulder, letting myself feel the simplicity of that moment. No more script, no more barriers, no more performing for anyone. Just us, an imperfect life, but filled with laughter and the loved ones I chose to keep close to me. Joy, it turns out, isn't something someone else can bring you or plan for you. True joy is when you're brave enough to choose it, despite your past, despite your prejudices, despite your imperfections. And tonight, I dance my own dance under the twinkling lights in my own little celebration. For the first time, I know what happiness is, being myself among the people I love. I used to think home was just a place. A roof, a name, walls filled with tradition. But after all that, I realized home is the life you build every day with the people you choose to keep around you. That day, my little shop was ablaze with light and laughter, more crowded than any party at the Kavanaugh estate. There were no more judgmental glances or formulaic conversations. Old friends and new neighbors dropped by, all of them comfortable and open, not because of the reputation of a famous family, but simply because the place truly welcomed them. Eli was next to me, busily carrying out trays of hot pastries for customers. Virginia hugged me for a long time, whispering, "You've really made this place your home." Edith helped June redecorate the corner of the shop, telling jokes as she worked. I walked around the store, talking to each person, shaking their hand, friends who had walked with me through the darkest days, and people who simply liked me for who I was. No one spoke of the Kavanaughs as a legacy or a burden anymore. It was now just a small part of my larger story. After the party, the next morning, we had a small brunch at the apartment. There was no long table with a white cloth, just a cramped kitchen counter, chairs pulled together, and homemade food, omelets, toast, fresh fruit, and hot coffee. Eli and Arthur washed the dishes together, teasing each other like old friends. June, beaming, announced that she was moving in with her partner. "I won't be away from you for long," she laughed, "but I want to continue writing my own story." I hugged my sister, relieved that she was strong enough to choose happiness on her own. Lorraine, my mother, was there too. She was no longer the center of the party, but sat quietly in the corner, observing silently, occasionally smiling when she caught my eye. After breakfast, she came over and touched my hand, no unnecessary words, just a quiet moment, a silent recognition between two women who had been through a lot. Sometimes, I know, forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken. That afternoon, Eli and I took a walk along the bay, where the sunset dyed the water red. The sea breeze was gentle, the air smelled of salt, grass, and freedom. We didn't say much, just held hands, listening to the waves and the children playing in the distance. I looked back at the path I had traveled, from a Kavanaugh's well-ordered garden party, to today, when I was the one who opened the door, inviting everyone into my new world. I think about the new traditions I'm building, simple meals together, honest conversations, the presence of people I truly love, no more masks or roles to please. I think about June, starting her own journey. I think about Arthur, learning to let go of expectations to find closeness with his daughter. I think about Edith, who persevered and showed me that family is possible, that it's never too late. And Lorraine, who, though she no longer controls the story, is still a part of my history, and I've learned to accept that. As the sun set, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I no longer had to live according to my family's reactions. I was truly living the life I chose, bit by bit, day by day, creating my own traditions. On the way home, Eli squeezed my hand and whispered, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" I smiled, relieved, knowing I wasn't alone on this journey. Before I go to bed, I sit by the window and write in my journal, not for anyone to read, but just to remind myself. If you're reading this and wondering if you can start over, trust me, you absolutely can. Sometimes the life you want is the life you choose every day, no matter how different your starting point may be. Home, it turns out, is not something you are given, nor is it a legacy you are forced to carry. Home is something you build from your own experiences, failures, and daring to choose happiness for yourself. I smiled, closed one journey, and began a new chapter, a chapter of peace, of freedom, of imperfect days that were completely mine. Hi everyone, I have been with you throughout Meredith's journey, from the days of hope and uncertainty to when she found her own meaning of home. When I think back on this story, What I think most about is the value of personal choice and the power of courage when facing family, the past, and yourself. Although we are all born into different circumstances, I believe that everyone has felt lost or constrained by the expectations that others place on them. Perhaps the biggest lesson I've learned from all of this is that none of us are defined by our heritage, our circumstances, or the mistakes of yesterday. Family is not a fixed box, but the connections we build every day, with tolerance, honesty, and sometimes even letting go. Only when we dare to step out of our comfort zone can we truly find our own path. How about you? Have you ever had to choose between your own desires and your family's expectations? What was the moment that made you feel like you truly belonged? If possible, please share your feelings in the comments section below. I believe each story will be a gift to this community. If this story brings back a special memory for you, or makes you think about the value of simple happiness, leave comment number 1 to let me know you listened to the end. Where are you watching the video from, or where in the country are you reading these lines? Let's share so we can feel closer together. And if you love gentle, everyday stories that touch the soul like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journeys. Thank you so much for being with Meredith and me through the past 16 chapters. May you always be strong enough to be true to yourself, tolerant enough to love, and have enough faith to start over at any time. See you again in new stories, where each of us can be ourselves and always have a home to return to.